If you have a Bible, please open with me to John chapter 10, Gospel of John chapter 10. We're continuing on in our series from the Gospel of John, and we're continuing to ask the question, do you really, truly, deeply love Jesus? And that's an important question because I think as we go through the Gospel of John, that's one that we're faced with pretty much in every chapter. And in this chapter, we're going to be asking the question, do you really, truly, deeply love like Jesus? Not just love Jesus, but do you love like Jesus? And that's one of the questions that will come up in the lesson today. I want to begin with a story. When our daughter Ashley was about 2 years old, I started to wonder if she knew what her name was. Anyone here have a 2-year-old and you wonder, do they know what their name is, right? And so I did a little test one day, and the test went like this. Ashley was walking across our living room, and I just said repeatedly, Ashley, 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 use different inflections, Ashley, and after 4 or 5 or 6 of those Ashleys, I finally just said, ice cream. And she turned and looked at me and walked directly to me. Now I began to wonder at that point, did my daughter actually believe that her name was ice cream? Which was a possibility because she really did like ice cream and she may have associated that. Or had she, at the early age of 2, developed something that we call selective hearing? What do you think it was? Probably selective hearing, right? Yeah. Anyone here have a problem with selective hearing? I mean, like you have it yourself. Like I have a problem with it because my spouse has selective hearing. Like some of you heard it that way. That's not what we're saying. I think selective hearing is a real thing, isn't it? Do you not tend to hear and remember the things that you want to hear and remember? And my wife Jan can give you multiple examples of how that's happened in the last maybe few weeks with me. I have a problem with selective hearing. But did you know that we also have a problem with selective seeing and selective understanding? I think it's absolutely true of the humankind that we tend to see what we want to see, hear what we want to hear, and understand what we want to understand. Can you relate to that? Maybe not if yourself, maybe you can't relate to it, but have you ever seen it done, right? You ever seen anyone that had that problem? I think all you have to do is get on Facebook for about 5 minutes and get in an argument with anybody. And you're going to notice that people will tend to see, hear, and understand what they want to see, hear, and understand. Did you know that problem didn't begin with social media and it didn't begin with marriage, but that's a problem that we see in the Bible. In fact, back in Isaiah chapter 6, the prophet Isaiah makes this observation that seeing they do not see, and hearing they do not hear, and they don't understand what God's doing. In fact, Jesus quotes that in Matthew chapter 13, that entire passage to illustrate that there were those in his day who were seeing him and the miracles, that were listening to his teaching, and yet because they could not see, even though they could see, and they didn't hear, even though they could hear, and they didn't understand because they chose not to, there was this ongoing problem that you can see, hear, and still not understand or get it. And I think that's a very real thing that's happening in the Gospel of John. In chapter 8, there's the issue of hearing. They continue to listen to Jesus, but they're not hearing what he's saying. In John chapter 9, we just talked about this last week, the guy that was born blind and receives back his sight. And the irony of the story is that the guy that starts off the chapter blind can not only see at the end of the chapter physically, but he can see spiritually. And those who thought that they could see spiritually at the beginning of the chapter, by the end of the chapter, they're identified as the people who are spiritually blind. And so Jesus continues to run up against these guys that continue to see Jesus doing miracles, but deny that he's the Messiah. They hear the words coming out of his mouth, and when he makes claims that he is the Messiah, or makes claims that he's the Son of God, they respond to him by saying, we hear what you're saying, but we don't believe you. Even though we see the works, we don't believe the works, and they just don't understand it. Do you think it's possible that the Pharisees, or the opponents that we see in the Gospels, is it possible that they had developed a very strong case of selective seeing, hearing, and understanding? I don't think they're really that much different than we are, although I hope that we are able to see Jesus and hear him and understand him for who he truly is. And so as we go through John chapter 10, we're going to work our way right through John chapter 10 fairly rapidly. I'm going to kind of feed you with a fire hose this morning because there's a lot here, but I want you to see this as it unfolds. And in the Gospel of John, I think we have to really dig in and pay attention to the movements of what these chapters do. So begin reading with me now. John chapter 10, Jesus says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter by the door into the fold of the sheep, but climbs up some other way, he is a thief and a robber." Okay? You know, if you were the one that was supposed to be taking care of the sheep, how would you get in? Well, it wouldn't be by climbing over a fence or by coming in through the backside of the barn or something like that. You would have authority and you would have the ability to come in and function as the one that's supposed to be there. Like the one who sneaks in is there for some other motive, right? Some other purposes, to steal and to rob. If you go home today, you should be able to get into your home legitimately, right? A few weeks ago, maybe it's a couple months ago now, we came home from church and we had a power problem with one of our GFCs in the upstairs. It actually kept us out of our garage, which is how we get into our house, and we discovered that we had not left a key with our neighbor to get in the door in the front, nor had we stored one outside. And after almost 15 years of living in this house, we've never locked ourselves out until that day. And so I ended up taking a rock and smashing a part of our window out, because that was cheaper to replace than a $500 bill from a keysmith coming over on Sunday afternoon, only to find out 5 minutes after we were back in the house that the GFC was working fine again, and we could have just waited a few minutes and gotten in. Well, if someone comes into your house and they're not supposed to be there, right, how do they get in? Well, they break in, and that's what Jesus is saying. There are those who are not supposed to be there, and when they get there, they have illicit motives. He says, "But he who enters by the door is a shepherd of the sheep. To him the doorkeeper opens, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he puts forth all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice." And that's a pretty common thing about shepherding. And of course, we're not shepherds. We don't go home this afternoon and have to worry about managing the sheep in our backyards or something like that. But if you read the Bible, you start to get the impression that shepherding was kind of a big thing. And one of the things you need to know about sheep is that they do get connected to the shepherd. In fact, they begin to hear the voice and recognize the voice of the shepherd, and they begin to trust the voice of the shepherd. And so Jesus is just making this observation that, you know, when you hear the shepherd's voice and you're a sheep, well, you trust it. And when you hear another voice that's not the shepherd's voice, what do? Well, you kind of stay back. You don't follow after them. It says in verse 5, "A stranger they simply will not follow, but will flee from him because they do not know the voice of strangers. This figure of speech Jesus spoke to them, but they did not," what's your Bible say? They did not understand what those things were which he had been saying to them. So he says in verse 7, "Jesus said to them again, 'Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers.'" Like the way to get into the pasture with the sheep is now going to be Jesus. He's trying to clarify what he's talking about. "All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them." Of course, they don't hear the voice of the one they don't trust. He says, "I am the door. If anyone enters through me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture." This is a prelude, by the way, of something he's going to say a little bit later when he talks in John 14 and prepares the disciples for his departure. He says, "I am the way, and I am the truth, and I am the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me." Like Jesus is the doorway through which one must go to enter into salvation. He says that here. Jesus is the doorway through which we enter to be into the Father's presence. Jesus is the only way to the Father. We live in a culture that gives us a lot of other voices that wants to say there are many ways to get to God, and there are many gods. But the Bible is very clear. There's only one God, and there's only one way to the Father, and that's through Jesus. He says that if you go in through him, you will be saved, and you will go in and out, and you'll find pasture. You'll find the things that you need to have. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says that if you knock, what's going to happen? The door will be opened. If you seek, you will find. If you ask, it will be granted to you. Jesus is saying something along the same lines here. That when you enter into this door, you enter into the pasture where God will provide the things that you need, including salvation. And he says that the thief comes only to steal and to kill and destroy. Why all this language about thieves all of a sudden? right? Up to this point, we went through 9 chapters. I don't think the word thief has shown up a single time. Who is he talking about? Why would he be talking about thieves and robbers so much? Why would he be talking about people who are speaking and the sheep aren't listening and following? Well, as you might pick up in this chapter and some that are about to follow, the ones who enter in and try to get the sheep or steal the sheep or to mislead the sheep are going to be very clearly identified as the Pharisees and the religious leaders of the day. Those are the ones who have not been listening to Jesus and hearing him. They have not been seeing his works and associating them with him being the Messiah, and they simply don't understand because they developed this selective hearing. In fact, they're there, and they are very dangerous to the people who are the sheep because they're trying to steal them. They're trying to pull them away. We're going to explore this more in a future chapter, but why would they do that? I think it had to do something with the fact that they wanted to maintain their wealth and their riches as religious leaders. They wanted also to maintain their status as religious leaders. And if Jesus is the Messiah, and if he is the Lord, then he is going to call them to give up all of those things in order to follow him. And they don't want to give up their stuff. Rather than give up their riches and give up their places of authority and their places of honor, they would rather hold on to those things than to see Jesus and to hear him and to understand and to follow him. Jesus says, look, the thief comes to steal and to destroy and to kill. I came so that they might have life. Not just life, but to have life even, he says, more abundantly. Have it abundantly. Now, Jesus goes on to talk to him about himself now. He's the door, right, through which we enter into salvation. He says in verse 11, I am the good shepherd. What's that indicate? Well, it indicates that there are bad shepherds out there. In fact, if you were to read in the Old Testament, there is a whole chapter about bad shepherding. In fact, it's in Ezekiel chapter 34. In Ezekiel 34, there's this indictment that the prophet Ezekiel gives against the leaders of Israel. They had become so interested in their wealth and what they wanted for themselves that they had actually taken advantage of and abused the people that were supposed to be under their care. And so this prophecy comes against them saying that you have abused the sheep for your advantage. And so what God's going to do, I'm summarizing chapter 34, he says, I'm going to take the sheep away from you. You're not going to be allowed to have sheep anymore because you've abused the sheep and didn't do what I told you to do or care for them the way you were supposed to. And I'm going to give the sheep to another. And that another is to the Messiah. Jesus is here starting to acknowledge for them that he is the fulfillment of Ezekiel chapter 34. These leaders who have abused and neglected the people that they were supposed to care for and lead as shepherds, they're going to lose their sheep, and Jesus is now going to be entrusted with them as the good shepherd. He says, I am the good shepherd. Peter speaks of Jesus later on. He says that he is the chief shepherd. He is the one who is the shepherd above all other shepherds. We have shepherds here at this church who are our elders, and they should be always looking at Jesus as the one who is the chief shepherd and the example for how a leader or a shepherd actually shepherds people. You look to Jesus, and that's where you're going to see that. He says, I am the good shepherd, and the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Remember I asked you earlier, do you truly, deeply love Jesus? The next question is, do you truly, deeply love like Jesus? And that's a hard one, because what Jesus just said here is that the true shepherd, the one that really loves sheep, what do? They lay their life down for the sheep. They give up their rights. They give up their things so that the sheep can have what they need. It's interesting when we talk about this laying down of life in Ephesians chapter 5 when talking about the marriage relationship. Paul points out, he says that the wives are to submit themselves to their husbands, even as to the Lord. And then he goes on to say right after that husbands are to love their wives and to do what? To lay down their lives for them, right? You are supposed to be submitting yourself to the point of death because you love your spouse. You give up your life. You give up your rights. Now, does that mean that you have to die immediately like a physical death? If necessary, I would say yes. But a much harder thing to do is every day of your life, consider another person more important than yourself and lay your rights and your life down for the sake of somebody else. That is a very hard thing to do. And what Jesus just said here is that there's no greater love than for one to lay down their life for another. He says that the good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. He says, he who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who is not the owner of the sheep, sees a wolf coming. You could read the rest of the verse if you want to, but you know what they're going to do, right? We already know that if you're a hired hand and you see a wolf coming, what are you doing? You're running, right? You're getting out of there as fast as you can. It says it leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. Jesus isn't going to run. Jesus is going to do anything and everything that's necessary to preserve the sheep and to give them what they need and to provide the salvation that they so desperately need and cannot have on their own. And so it says that he flees because he's a hired hand and not concerned about the sheep. He says, I am the good shepherd. He says, I'm going to remind you, I'm going to say it a second time. I am the good shepherd, and I know my own, and my own know me, right? Sheep know the voice of their shepherd. I know mine, and they know me, even as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. He says, I have other sheep. Now, wait a minute. What are we talking about here? Other sheep all of a sudden. Well, the sheep that he's been talking to are the sheep that are the people of Israel, who are the people of God. And now he says, I have other sheep. Who do you think that might be? How about all the other people who aren't the Jews? It would be the Gentiles. Jesus has come to fulfill the promise of Abraham, through which he said that all nations would be blessed. Not just the nation of the people of Israel or the people of God who are represented by Israel, but all people, including all Gentiles. Anyone who believes and comes to him receives salvation. Back to John chapter 3, verse 16. He says, I have other sheep which are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will hear my voice. They don't really know his voice yet. They're outside of that flock. He says, they will know my voice, and they will become one flock with one shepherd. This becomes a big problem in the early church when you have Jews and Gentiles trying to figure out how do we work together? How do we do these things where we have different cultures and different backgrounds and we have different ideas about things? How do we work all that out? Read the book of Acts. You'll see the problem through and through. And they've got to learn to work together as one body. Two flocks, the Jews and the Gentiles, working together as one. He says, one flock with one shepherd. For this reason, the Father loves me, because I lay down my life so that I may take it again. Remember, we've said this now several times. Jesus is not trying to hide the fact that he does know that he's going to die. What else does he know? He knows that he's going to live again. And he said this several times in the earlier chapters. He says it here again. He's speaking of the resurrection. He says, I lay down my life so that I may take it again. I was talking to the teens in class this morning, teaching the teen class, and I made the point. I said, what if Jesus had died and been buried? Would that be good news? Well, no, it wouldn't be good news. It's only good news because Jesus died and he was buried and he's raised again to new life. We wouldn't be talking about Jesus right now or ever if he had been buried and stayed in a grave. The only reason we talk about Jesus is because he proved to be exactly who he claimed to be, that he is the Messiah, that he is the Son of God, and that he has, we'll see in a moment, the right and the authority to lay down his life because he loves the sheep and to take his life back up again. He says, no one has taken it away from me. He lays his life down voluntarily. No one has taken it away from me, but I lay it down on my own initiative. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. You might want to say about yourself that you have the authority to lay your life down. Do you? You have the right, the authority to do that. You could lay your life down. But do you have the right or the authority to take your life back up again? Well, you don't. Only the Son of God can overcome death. Only the Son of God lays his life down with authority and takes his life back up with authority. If he did not have the authority to take his life back up, we wouldn't be talking about him today. It's one of the single most important things that we recognize about Jesus is that he has the right and the authority to lay down his life, but also to take his life back up again. He says, this commandment I received from my Father. God sent him to do it. He agreed to do it. On his own initiative, he lays down his life, and he takes it back up again. Now, not surprisingly, the very next verse begins with a division occurred. Every time Jesus has a lesson like this, people kind of get up in arms about it, and there's this division. And I think it's important to recognize that division and to recognize that it's not just a thing that happened back then in those days. When we are confronted with these things about Jesus, that he is the good shepherd, that he's the door, that he's the only way to the Father, that he can lay his life down, and that he's resurrected because he can take his life back up again, a division occurs. And that division exists exactly the same way as it did back then, but maybe for different reasons. People have to make decisions based on what you see and what you hear and you understand from Jesus. Are you going to listen and see and understand and follow him, or are you going to see what you want to see, hear what you want to hear, understand what you want to hear, and perhaps walk the other way? A division occurred among the Jews because of these words. Many of them were saying, now what would they possibly come up with? Well, they seem to come up with this in a few of the Gospels. He says, he has a demon, like he must be possessed. How do you come up with that from what Jesus is saying? But he has a demon and is insane. Listen, if Jesus laid his life down and didn't take it back up again, we might actually want to say that he might be crazy, right? He might have been a lunatic, he might have been a liar, but he certainly wasn't Lord unless he's able to take his life back up again. He says, it says next, he says, why do you listen to him? This is all crazy talk. Others were saying, I don't know, I'm seeing, I'm hearing, I'm starting to pick this up, I'm understanding. He says, these are not the sayings of one demon-possessed. A demon cannot open the eyes of the blind, can he? What they appeal to is what they've just seen. Jesus has healed a man that was born blind, and everyone saw it, and everyone has to deal with this reality. Now, if you think that Jesus is going to back off at this point, if you think Jesus is just going to go, all right, I think they've had enough. He's not done yet. He's going to go further. Listen to this, verse 22. It says, at that time was the Feast of Dedication, which, by the way, in modern terms is called Hanukkah, right? You've probably heard of the word Hanukkah, but it's the Feast of Dedication. Took place at Jerusalem. It was winter. And Jesus was walking in the temple in the portico of Solomon. The Jews then gathered around him and were saying to him, how long will you keep us in suspense? Okay, this is almost humorous to me a little bit because Jesus has been giving them all the information that they need already, but they're like, we don't get it. How long will you keep us guessing here and in suspense? If you are the Christ, tell us plainly. Now, I have heard some people say that Jesus never claims to be the Son of God in the Gospels or in the Bible. It's claimed about him, but that Jesus never makes that claim. Let's see if you still believe that here in just a moment. It says here, how long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Christ, tell us plainly. And Jesus answered them, I told you. Like you're just not listening, right? You've got selective hearing going on here. I told you, and you do not believe. The works that I do in my Father's name, these testify of me, but you do not believe because you are not of my sheep. Now that's an insult to them, right? You're not my sheep, you're not my followers. You don't hear my voice because you haven't been listening to my Father. And they claim that they've been listening to the Father. In fact, they even quote the scriptures saying that they are the disciples or the descendants of Abraham and Moses. It says, my sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they do something about it. What do? Church? It says they follow me, right? They hear me, they see these things, and they follow me. And I give eternal life to them. Remember, he's the door through which they enter into pasture where there is salvation. He says, I give them eternal life, and they will never perish, and no one will snatch them out of my hand. Some people have made that out to mean something like that once you're saved, you're always saved. But really all that means is that they're protected, that your salvation is protected by Jesus. No one can take it away from you. However, you can walk away from it. I would say something like that instead. He says, my Father who has given them to me is greater than all. He says, and no one is able to snatch them out of the Father's hand. Like you can't take them out of my hand, and you can't take them out of my Father's hand. And he says, I and the Father are, what's your Bible say? We're one. We're one. Now, you suppose that they said, that really settles it right there. Easy enough. Thank you for explaining, Jesus. We get it now. We're just going to follow you. What do they do next? The Jews picked up stones. Why? Because they heard him make a claim. And the claim wasn't that he is a son of God. It wasn't that he is a come along lately, maybe the Messiah kind of person. Is because he claimed to be God in that moment. I and the Father are the same. I and the Father are one. The Jews picked up stones again to stone him. Not the first time they did this. Jesus answered, I showed you many good works from the Father. For which of them are you stoning me? It's like, are you stoning me because I've healed people who were sick? Because I've healed people who were deaf? Because I've healed people who are blind? Why is it again that you're picking up stones to kill me? He says, the Jews answered him, for a good work we do not stone you, but for blasphemy, because you, being a man, make yourself out to be God. Jesus answered them, has it not been written in your law, I said you are gods? Now this gets a little complicated. And sometimes what we do with passages like this is we read them and we're like, well, Jesus quotes from the Old Testament there, and it seems a little weird. I'm not really sure I understand it. Let's just keep reading and go on right past it. Let's not do that today. Let's take a minute to do this. He says, he quotes from, this is actually from Psalm chapter 82, verse 6. It says, in the law it's written, I said, you are gods. And he says, if he called them gods to whom the word of God came, and the scripture cannot be broken, do you say of him whom the Father sanctified and sent into the world, you are blaspheming because I said, what does he say? I said? Because I said I am the Son of God. Now, it's a little hard to follow, but I think it's actually not once you read back in Psalm chapter 82. In Psalm 82, the reference is to people who have been given the right to judge and who have authority and who exercise that judgment and authority over others as if they are gods. It's not saying that they're divine. It wasn't saying that they are God on earth. It's simply saying that they were exercising this judgment and authority in a way that was over other people. In fact, it's saying it in a way because they were abusing that authority. They were abusing that judgment and taking advantage of other people. And what Jesus is doing here is making an argument from the lesser to the greater. You've heard me talk about this before, but to make it really simple here, Jesus is saying that in your own scriptural understanding, there are those who are called gods, right? And if it was okay for them to be called gods, in a lesser sense, right? They weren't really gods, but if you could call them that, then why are you so surprised that I would claim to be the Son of God, or that he would claim to be God himself? He is the greater. After all, he says, verse 37, if I do not do the works of my Father, don't believe me. But if I do them, though you do not believe me, believe the works, so that you may know and understand that the Father is in me and I in the Father. He made the argument that these guys were referred to as gods, and they were abusing their authority, and they were going to be judged themselves for what they had done. But if that's possible, when he claims to be God, or claims to be the Son of God, he's an even greater example of that, because he has the words and he has the works to back it up. He has the words and the works that he was sent by the Father to say and to do. Therefore, he says, they were seeking again to seize him, and he eluded their grasp. They still want to kill Jesus. They've got a selective seeing problem. They have a selective hearing problem and a selective understanding problem. It says that he went away again beyond the Jordan to a place where John was first baptizing, and he was staying there. Many came to him and were saying, while John performed no sign, yet everything John said about this man was true. And, this is very, very important, many believed in him there. The tide is turning. The tide is turning. There are those who do not believe because they refuse to see, they refuse to hear, and they refuse to understand. And yet there are still others who are gaining momentum in the Gospel of John, who are starting to see and hear and understand, and they're making a decision that they're going to follow. They're going to follow Jesus because of what they have seen, what they have heard, and what they've come to understand. The question that I want to leave you with today is this. Whose voice are you listening to? Whose voice are you listening to? Now, you might be thinking, well, what are my options? Well, maybe you could be listening to your own voice. There's things in your life that you're going to choose to do in the next week. There's things you've chosen to do in recent history. And could you honestly say that you did them because you were listening to God and doing what he wanted you to do, or you were listening to your voice and what you wanted to do? And we have to learn to discern between those two voices, because the most prevalent voice that's in my head most of the time that I have to drown out is my own voice, because I tend to want to see what I want to see, hear what I want to hear, and do what I want to do. And I think that maybe we're all a little bit like that, aren't we? We need to learn to drown out our own voice so that we can hear the voice of Jesus. Now, there might be some other voices, the voice of culture. Our culture is always preaching to us. They're always telling us what to believe and what to think. Can we turn those voices off and listen to Jesus and make our decisions about how we live in this world and in this culture that we live in today, not by what everybody tells us we have to or should or ought or must believe, but by listening to Jesus and seeing Jesus and understanding Jesus and making our decisions about who we are and what we will do and where we will go and what we will say based on what we see and hear and understand about Jesus and not about our culture. Because if you listen to culture, you know what's going to happen? You're going to end up looking a whole lot like the culture around you. Jesus entered into this world so that he could show us the way, so that he could teach us the way, so that we might be able to understand that he is the way, the truth, and the life, and that no one comes to the Father except through him. And then back to that other question. Are you living a life that is sacrificial? Do you understand the love that the Good Shepherd has modeled for us? Are you laying your life down for the sake of others? Are you giving up your rights and your privileges so that others could be blessed? Are you giving up your life so that others might have life, as Jesus describes it, more abundantly? These are some important questions, and we're going to keep on struggling with this as we go forward in the next couple of chapters. Do you have a selective seeing problem? Do you have a selective hearing problem? Do you have a selective understanding problem? Or are you seeking to see, hear, and understand Jesus and to do what these other people are doing, to believe him and then believe him and follow him? Let's pray together.